Der Ring der Nibelungen, WWV 86, is a cycle of 4 epic operas by the German composer Richard Wagner. The works are based loosely on characters from the Norse sagas and the Nibelungenlied. The composer termed the cycle a Bühnenfestspiel, structured in 3 days preceded by a Vorabend. It is often referred to as the Ring cycle, Wagner's Ring, or simply the Ring. Wagner wrote the libretto and music over the course of about 26 years, from 1848 to 1874. The 4 operas that constitute the Ring cycle are, in sequence, Das Rheingold, Die Wolke 1/4, Siegfried, Gar Paragraph Tte Currency. Although individual operas of this sequence are sometimes performed separately, Wagner intended them to be performed in series. The first performance as a cycle opened the first Bayreuth Festival in 1876, beginning with Das Rheingold on August 13 and ending with Gar Paragraph Tte Currency on August 17. Title: Wagner's title is most literally rendered in English as the Ring of the Nibelung. The Nibelung of the title is the dwarf Alberic, and the ring in question is the one he fashions from the Rheingold. The title therefore denotes Alberic's ring. The N suffix in Nibelungen can occur in a genitive singular, accusative singular, dative singular, or a plural in any case, but the article de immediately preceding makes it clear that the genitive singular is intended here. Nibelungen is occasionally mistaken as a plural, but the Ring of the Nibelungs is incorrect. Content: the cycle is a work of extraordinary scale. Perhaps the most outstanding facet of the monumental work is its sheer length. A full performance of the cycle takes place over 4 nights at the opera, with a total playing time of about 15 hours, depending on the conductor's pacing. The first and shortest opera, Das Rheingold, typically lasts 2.5 hours, while the final and longest, Gar Paragraph Tte Currency, takes up to 5 hours, excluding intervals. The cycle is modeled after ancient Greek dramas that were presented as 3 tragedies and 1 satyr play. The Ring proper begins with Die Wolke 1/4 and ends with Gar Paragraph Tte Currency, with Rheingold as a prelude. Wagner called Das Rheingold a Vorabend or preliminary evening, and Die Wolke 1/4, Siegfried and Gar Paragraph Tte Currency were subtitled First Day, Second Day and Third Day, respectively, of the trilogy proper. The scale and scope of the story is epic. It follows the struggles of gods, heroes, and several mythical creatures over the eponymous magic ring that grants domination over the entire world. The drama and intrigue continue through 3 generations of protagonists, until the final cataclysm at the end of Gar Paragraph Tte Currency. The music of the cycle is thick and richly textured, and grows in complexity as the cycle proceeds. Wagner wrote for an orchestra of gargantuan proportions, including a greatly enlarged brass section with new instruments such as the Wagner tuba, bass trumpet and contrabass trombone. Remarkably, he uses a chorus only relatively briefly, in Acts 2 and 3 of Gar Paragraph Tte Currency, and then mostly of men with just a few women. He eventually had a purpose-built theatre constructed, the Bayreuth Festspiel, in which to perform this work. The theatre has a special stage that blends the huge orchestra with the singers' voices, allowing them to sing at a natural volume. The result was that the singers did not have to strain themselves vocally during the long performances. List of characters, story. The plot revolves around a magic ring that grants the power to rule the world, forged by the Nibelung dwarf Alberic from gold he stole from the Rhine maidens in the river Rhine. With the assistance of the god Loge, Wotan the chief of the gods steals the ring from Alberic, but is forced to hand it over to the giants, Fafnir and Fasolt, in payment for building the home of the gods, Valhalla, or they will take Freya, who provides the gods with the golden apples that keep them young. Wotan's schemes to regain the ring, spanning generations, drive much of the action in the story. His grandson, the mortal Siegfried, wins the ring by slaying Fafnir as Wotan intended but is eventually betrayed and slain as a result of the intrigues of Alberic's son Hagen, who wants the ring. Finally, the Valkyrie Braun Kortenhilde Siegfried's lover and Wotan's daughter who lost her immortality for defying her father in an attempt to save Siegfried's father Sigmund returns the ring to the Rhine maidens as she commits suicide on Siegfried's funeral pyre. Hagen is drowned as he attempts to recover the ring. In the process, the gods and Valhalla are destroyed. Details of the storylines can be found in the articles on each opera. Wagner created the story of the ring by fusing elements from many German and Scandinavian myths and folk tales. The Old Norse Edda supplied much of the material for Das Rheingold, while Die Walker 1/4 was largely based on the Var-Paragraph Lsunga saga. Siegfried contains elements from the Edda, the Var-Paragraph Lsunga saga and Thidrek saga. The final opera, Gar-Paragraph Tterda Currency draws from the 12th century German poem, the Nibelungenlied, which appears to have been the original inspiration for the ring. The ring has been the subject of myriad interpretations. For example, George Bernard Shaw, in The Perfect Wagnerite, argues for a view of the ring as an essentially socialist critique of industrial society and its abuses. Robert Donington in Wagner's Ring and its Symbols interprets it in terms of Jungian psychology, as an account of the development of unconscious archetypes in the mind, leading towards individuation. Concept: in his earlier operas Wagner's style had been based, rather than on the Italian style of opera, on the German style as developed by Carl Maria von Weber, with elements of the grand opera style of Giacomo Mabir. However, he came to be dissatisfied with such a format as a means of artistic expression. He expressed this clearly in his essay A Communication to My Friends, in which he condemned the majority of modern artists, in painting and in music, as feminine. The world of art close fenced from life, in which art plays with herself. Where however the impressions of life produce an overwhelming poetic force, we find the masculine, the generative path of art. Wagner unfortunately found that his audiences were not willing to follow where he led them. The public, by their enthusiastic reception of Rienzi and their cooler welcome of the Flying Dutchman, had plainly shown me what I must set before them if I sought to please. I completely undeceived their expectations. They left the theatre, after the first performance of Tannhäuser Currency User, 1845, in a confused and discontented mood. The feeling of utter loneliness in which I now found myself, quite unmanned me. My Tannhäuser Currency User had appealed to a handful of intimate friends alone. Finally Wagner announces, I shall never write an opera more. As I have no wish to invent an arbitrary title for my works, I will call them dramas. I propose to produce my myth in 3 complete dramas, preceded by a lengthy prelude. At a specially appointed festival, I propose, some future time, to produce those 3 dramas with their prelude, in the course of 3 days and a foreevening. The object of this production I shall consider thoroughly attained, if I and my artistic comrades, the actual performers, shall within these 4 evenings succeed in artistically conveying my purpose to the true emotional understanding of spectators who shall have gathered together expressly to learn it. This is his first public announcement of the form of what would become the Ring cycle. In accordance with the ideas expressed in his essays of the period 1849–51, the 4 parts of the Ring were originally conceived by Wagner to be free of the traditional operatic concepts of aria and operatic chorus. The Wagner scholar Kurt von Westenhagen identified 3 important problems discussed in opera and drama, which were particularly relevant to the Ring cycle: the problem of unifying verse stress with melody, the disjunctions caused by formal arias in dramatic structure, and the way in which opera music could be organized on a different basis of organic growth and modulation, and the function of musical motifs in linking elements of the plot whose connections might otherwise be inexplicit. This became known as the leitmotif technique, although Wagner himself did not use this word. However, Wagner relaxed some aspects of his self-imposed restrictions somewhat as the work progressed. As George Bernard Shaw sardonically noted of the last opera Gar-Paragraph Tterda Currency. And now, O Nibelungen spectator, pluck up. For all allegories come to an end somewhere. The rest of what you are going to see is opera, and nothing but opera. Before many bars have been played, Siegfried in the Wake and Brynhild, newly become tenor and soprano, will sing a concerted cadenza. Plunge on from that to a magnificent love duet. The work which follows, entitled Night Falls on the Gods, Shaw's translation of Gar paragraph TTERDA Currency, is a thorough grand opera. Music, leitmotifs. As a significant element in The Ring and his subsequent works, Wagner adopted the use of leitmotifs. These are recurring themes and/or harmonic progressions. They musically denote an action, object, emotion, character or other subject mentioned in the text and/or presented on stage. Wagner referred to them in opera and drama as guides to feeling, and described how they could be used to inform the listener of a musical or dramatic subtext to the action on stage in the same way as a Greek chorus did for the theatre of ancient Greece. While other composers before Wagner had already used similar techniques, The Ring was a landmark in the extent to which they were employed, and in the ingenuity of their combination and development. Instrumentation. Wagner made significant innovations in orchestration in this work. He wrote for a very large orchestra, using the whole range of instruments used singly or in combination to express the great range of emotion and events of the drama. Wagner even commissioned the production of new instruments, including the Wagner tuba, invented to fill a gap he found between the tone qualities of the horn and the trombone, as well as variations of existing instruments, such as the bass trumpet and a contrabass trombone with a double slide. He also developed the Wagner bell, enabling the bassoon to reach the low A natural, whereas normally B flat is the instrument's lowest note. If such a bell is not to be used, then a contrabassoon should be employed. All four operas have a very similar instrumentation. The core ensemble of instruments are 1 piccolo, 3 flutes, 3 oboes, English horn, 3 soprano clarinets, 1 bass clarinet, 3 bassoons, 8 horns, 3 trumpets, 1 bass trumpet, 3 tenor trombones, 1 contrabass trombone, 1 contrabass tuba. A percussion section with 4 timpani, triangle, cymbals, glockenspiel. 6 harps and a string section consisting of 16 first and second violins, 12 violas, 12 violoncellos, and 8 double basses. Das Rheingold requires 1 bass drum, 1 tam-tam, 1 onstage harp and 18 onstage anvils. Die Wolke 1/4 requires 1 snare drum, tam-tam, and an onstage stereohorn. Siegfried requires 1 onstage English horn and 1 onstage horn. Gar paragraph TTERDA Currency requires 5 onstage horns and 3 onstage stereohorns. Tonality. Much of The Ring, especially from Siegfried Act 3 onwards, cannot be said to be in traditionally clearly defined keys for long stretches, but rather in key regions, each of which flows smoothly into the following. This fluidity avoided the musical equivalent of clearly defined musical paragraphs, and assisted Wagner in building the work's huge structures. Tonal indeterminacy was heightened by the increased freedom with which he used dissonance and chromaticism. Chromatically altered chords are used very liberally in The Ring, and this feature, which is also prominent in Tristan und Isolde, is often cited as a milestone on the way to Arnold Schoenberg's revolutionary break with the traditional concept of key and his dissolution of consonants as the basis of an organizing principle in music. Composition of The Ring cycle, the text. In summer 1848 Wagner wrote the Nibelung myth, a sketch for a drama, combining the medieval sources previously mentioned into a single narrative, very similar to the plot of the eventual Ring cycle, but nevertheless with substantial differences. Later that year he began writing a libretto entitled Siegfried's Tod. He was possibly stimulated by a series of articles in the Zeitschrift für Unkultur Musik, inviting composers to write a national opera based on the Nibelungenlied, a 12th-century High German poem which, since its rediscovery in 1755, had been hailed by the German Romantics as the German national epic. Siegfried's Tod dealt with the death of Siegfried, the central heroic figure of the Nibelungenlied. The idea had occurred to others. The correspondence of Fanny and Felix Mendelssohn in 1840-41 reveals that they were both outlining scenarios on the subject. Fanny wrote, "The hunt with Siegfried's death provides a splendid finale to the second act." By 1850, Wagner had completed a musical sketch for Siegfried's Tod. He now felt that he needed a preliminary opera, Der Junge Siegfried, to explain the events in Siegfried's Tod. The first draft of Der Junge Siegfried was completed in May 1851. By October, he had made the momentous decision to embark on a cycle of 4 operas, to be played over 4 nights, Das Rheingold, Die Walküre one Quarterie, Der Junge Siegfried and Siegfried's Tod. The text for all 4 operas was completed in December 1852, and privately published in February 1853. The music. In November 1853, Wagner began the composition draft of Das Rheingold. Unlike the verses, which were written as it were in reverse order, the music would be composed in the same order as the narrative. Composition proceeded until 1857, when the final score up to the end of Act II of Siegfried was completed. Wagner then laid the work aside for 12 years, during which he wrote Tristan und Isolde and Die Mastersinger von Na one Quarter Rnberg. By 1869, Wagner was living at Tribben on Lake Lucerne, sponsored by King Ludwig II of Bavaria. He returned to Siegfried, and, remarkably, was able to pick up where he left off. In October, he completed the final opera in the cycle. He chose the title Gar Paragraph Tterda Currency instead of Siegfried's Tod for this opera. In the completed work the gods are destroyed in accordance with the new pessimistic thrust of the cycle, not redeemed as in the more optimistic originally planned ending. Wagner also decided to show on stage the events of Das Rheingold and Die Walküre one Quarterie, which had hitherto only been presented as back narration in the other 2 operas. These changes resulted in some discrepancies in the cycle, but these do not diminish the value of the work. Performances, first productions. On King Ludwig's insistence, and over Wagner's objections, special previews of Das Rheingold and Die Walküre one Quarterie were given at the National Theatre in Munich, before the rest of the Ring. Thus, Das Rheingold premiered on September 22, 1869, and Die Walküre one Quarterie on June 26, 1870. Wagner subsequently delayed announcing his completion of Siegfried to prevent this opera also being premiered against his wishes. Wagner had long desired to have a special festival opera house, designed by himself, for the performance of The Ring. In 1871, he decided on a location in the Bavarian town of Bayreuth. In 1872, he moved to Bayreuth, and the foundation stone was laid. Wagner would spend the next 2 years attempting to raise capital for the construction, with scant success. King Ludwig finally rescued the project in 1874 by donating the needed funds. The Bayreuth Festspielhaus opened in 1876 with the first complete performance of The Ring, which took place from 13 to August 17. In 1882, London impresario Alfred Schultz Curtius organised the first staging in the United Kingdom of The Ring cycle, conducted by Anton Seidel and directed by Angelo Newman. The first production of The Ring in Italy was in Venice, just 2 months after his 1883 death, at La Fenice. Notable modern productions. The Ring is a major undertaking for any opera company. Staging 4 interlinked operas requires a huge commitment both artistically and financially. In most opera houses, production of a new Ring cycle will happen over a number of years, with 1 or 2 operas in the cycle being added each year. The Bayreuth Festival, where the complete cycle is performed most years, is unusual in that a new cycle is almost always created within a single year. Early productions of the Ring cycle stayed close to Wagner's original Bayreuth staging. Trends set at Bayreuth have continued to be influential. Following the closure of the Festspielhaus during the Second World War, the 1950s saw productions by Wagner's grandsons Wieland and Wolfgang Wagner, which emphasized the human aspects of the drama in a more abstract setting. Perhaps the most famous modern production was the centennial production of 1976, The Jahrhundertring, directed by Patrice Carr, copyright Rowe and conducted by Pierre Boulez. Set in the Industrial Revolution, it replaced the depths of the Rhine with a hydroelectric power dam and featured grimy sets populated by men and gods in 19th and 20th century business suits. This drew heavily on the reading of The Ring as a revolutionary drama and critique of the modern world, famously expounded by George Bernard Shaw in The Perfect Wagnerite. Early performances were booed, but the audience of 1980 gave it a 90-minute ovation in its final year. The production is now generally regarded as revolutionary and a classic. Although many Ring productions try to remain close to Wagner's original stage design and direction, others seek to reinterpret the Ring for modern audiences, often including decor and action that Wagner himself did not envisage. The production by Peter Hall, conducted by Georg Solti at Bayreuth in 1983, is an example of the former, while the production by Richard Jones at the Royal Opera House Covent Garden in 1994 1996, conducted by Bernard Haitink, is an example of the latter. In 2003, the first production of the cycle in Russia in modern times was conducted by Valery Gergiev at the Mariinsky Opera, St. Petersburg, designed by George Tsipin. The production drew parallels with the Session mythology. The Royal Danish Opera performed a complete Ring cycle in May 2006 in its new waterfront home, the Copenhagen Opera House. This version of the Ring tells the story from the viewpoint of Brawen Kortenhilde and has a distinct feminist angle. For example, in a key scene in Die Wolke 1/4, it is Sieglind and not Siegmund who manages to pull the sword Nithung out of a tree. At the end of the cycle, Brawen Kortenhilde does not die, but instead gives birth to Siegfried's child. San Francisco Opera and Washington National Opera began a co-production of a new Ring cycle in 2006 directed by Francesca Zambello. The production uses imagery from various eras of American history and has a feminist and environmentalist viewpoint. Los Angeles Opera presented its first Ring cycle in 2010 directed by Atram Freya. Freya staged an abstract production that was praised by many critics but criticized by some of its own stars. The production featured a raked stage, flying props, screen projections and special effects. The Metropolitan Opera began a new Ring cycle in 2010, conducted by James Levine with Bryn Terfel as Wotan. Deborah Voigt was Brawen Kortenhilde in the April 2011 production of Die Wolke 1/4. The staging of Das Rheingold by Robert Lepage involved 24 identical wedges able to rotate independently on a horizontal axis across the stage, providing level, sloping, angled or moving surfaces facing the audience. Bubbles, falling stones and fire are projected onto these surfaces, linked by computer with the music and movement of the characters. In 2013, the Met's Orchestra and Chorus were awarded the Grammy Award for Best Opera Recording for their performance of Der Ring der Nibelungen. It is possible to perform the Ring with fewer resources than usual. In 1990, the City of Birmingham Touring Opera presented a two-evening adaptation for a limited number of solo singers, each doubling several roles, and 18 orchestral players. This version was subsequently given productions in the USA. A heavily cut-down version was performed at the Teatro Colacube Den in Buenos Aires on November 26, 2012 to mark the 200th anniversary of Wagner's birth. Recordings of the Ring cycle. Other treatments of the Ring cycle, orchestral versions of the Ring cycle, summarizing the work in a single movement of an hour or so, have been made by Leopold Stokowski, Lauren Morsel and Henk de Vlieger. The comedienne Anna Russell had a renowned 22-minute routine explaining the plot and music of the Ring cycle, which included a phrase which became identified with her, "I'm not making this up, you know." Produced by the Ridiculous Theatrical Company, Charles Ledlam's 1977 play Der Ring Gott Farblenjet was a spoof of Wagner's operas. The show received a well-reviewed 1990 revival in New York at the Lucille Lortel Theatre. In 1982 the National Theatre of Brent performed a summary of the cycle in about 75 minutes, which also included a recapitulation of the composer's life, with a cast of 3 and a piano. Tom Holt's 1982 humorous fantasy novel, Expecting Someone Taller, includes many of the characters of Wagner's operas, and features the Ring and the Tarnhelm. Stephen A. Donaldson's science fiction space opera series The Gap Cycle also shares elements with Der Ring der Nibelungen. The protagonist in Jonathan Toland's play The Twilight of the Golds is obsessed with the Ring cycle, and tries to show his family how its themes relates to their conflict. The play was adapted into a feature film in 1996. What's Opera, Doc? Is a 1957 American animated cartoon short in the Merry Melodies series, directed by Chuck Jones for Warner Brothers. Cartoons. The Michael Maltese story features Elmer Fudd chasing Bugs Bunny through a parody Richard Wagner's operas, particularly Daring Day Nibelungen and Tannhäuser Currency User. It is sometimes characterized as a condensed version of Wagner's Ring Cycle, and its music borrows heavily from the second opera Die Wolke 1/4, woven around the standard Bugs-Elmer conflict. The TV show Xena, Warrior Princess had a trilogy of episodes in 2000 based substantially on the Ring Cycle, The Rheingold, The Ring, and Return of the Valkyrie. In these the character Xena takes the roles of the Forger of the Ring, the one corrupted by its power, and the eventual returner of the Rheingold. These episodes also weave in a storyline from Beowulf. Wagner's Ring and Tolkien's Ring, J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy novels The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings share elements with Daring Day Nibelungen, but Tolkien himself denied that he had been inspired by Wagner's work, saying that, both rings were round, and there the resemblance ceases. In spite of Tolkien's protestation, there are various similarities in addition to annularity, a ring of power which curses its bearer. A powerful wanderer in a large hat carrying a spear or staff. Magical invisibility. The reforging of a powerful sword. A riddle contest. Sma copyright Agel's murder of his cousin Diagel for possession of the ring and Fafnir's murder of his brother Fasolt for the same reason. The slaying of a powerful gold-hoarding dragon. To name but a few. Tolkien may have drawn, albeit partially, upon common source material, including the Var paragraph Lsunga saga and the Poetic Edda. The crucial element of the storyline, that the ring is evil, and will work of itself to the undoing of its possessor, is common to both, as is the lust for world domination connected with its power, and that the ring has been stolen or captured from its rightful owner. References, Notes. Sources, Burbage, Peter and Richard Sutton, The Wagner Companion, London, 1979. ISBN 0-571-11450-4, Cook, Drake, I Saw the World End, A Study of Wagner's Ring. New York, Oxford University Press, 2000 ISBN 0-19-315318-1. DiGattani, John Louis, Penetrating Wagner's Ring, An Anthology. New York, Da Capo Press, 1978. ISBN 978-0-306-80437-3, Gregor-Dellin, Martin, Richard Wagner, His Life, His Work, His Century. Harcourt, ISBN 0-15-177151-0. Gray, Thomas S. The Cambridge Companion to Wagner, Cambridge University Press. ISBN 978-0-521-64439-6, Holman, J. K. Wagner's Ring, A Listener's Companion and Concordance. Portland OR, Amadeus Press, 2001. Lee, M. Owen, Wagner's Ring, Turning the Sky Round. Amadeus Press, ISBN 978-87910-186-2, McGee, Brian, The Tristan Chord, Wagner and Philosophy. Metropolitan Books, ISBN 0-8050-6788-4, McGee, Brian, Aspects of Wagner. Oxford University Press, ISBN 0-19-284012-May 6, Thomas, Decoding Wagner. Amadeus Press, ISBN 978-1-57467-097-4, Mendelssohn, Fanny, ed. Marcia Citron Letters of Fanny Hensel to Felix Mendelssohn. Pendragon Press, ISBN 978-0-918728-52-4, Millington, Barry. The Wagner Compendium. Thames and Hudson, ISBN 0-500-28274-9, Millington, Barry. Daring Day Nibelungen, Conception and Interpretation in Gray, 74 €84, Saber, Rudolph, Richard Wagner, Daring Day Nibelungen, a companion volume. Phaidon Press, ISBN 0-7148-3650-8, Shaw, George Bernard. The Perfect Wagnerite. Online version at Gutenberg.org. Access July 20, 2010. Spots, Frederick, Bayreuth, A History of the Wagner Festival. Yale University Press. ISBN 0-7126-5277-9, Wagner, Richard, Tr. William Ashton Ellis, The Artwork of the Future, and Other Works, Lincoln and London. ISBN 978-0-8032-9752-4. A Communication to My Friends is on ppA 269 €, 392. External links, Anthony Tomasini. The Kira Ring, Let's Hear It for the Home Team. The New York Times. Radio Lab. The Ring and I. WNYC. A podcast about the Ring 2004.